The fact that we actually got hemp across the line for these projects remains still a kind of delight to me because it was by no means guaranteed.
Forum business partners, the Australian Industrial Hemp Conference, Hemp Building Director and the Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food, which, as we heard about, I'll refer to as Lisa from time to time. Okay, Banana.
Thank you.
See how that works.
In the program, this was built as being a conversation around barriers to hemp masonry construction in public buildings. But as I reflected on the last 5 years of, this is where you need multifocals, of designing and delivering hemp projects and the work that many people in this room have done to remove some of those barriers, I thought it might be timely to really reframe this as an invitation or maybe even an exhortation to mainstream plant-based buildings. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I guess to reflect on Indigenous resource management. So my colleague Jifa Greenaway, who some of you may have heard speak before, talks a lot about scar trees as this kind of fantastic muse where only enough was taken to meet human need but also allow the tree to continue to thrive. And I think everyone can agree that our current method for designing and delivering built environments for humans is not quite so sustainable. And so for us as a practice, we think that mainstreaming hemp in construction is critical to really rapidly turning this around. So very briefly, who are we? This crew of humans. So we're a 6-person practice, a tiny practice really in the scale of things, particularly given some of the other speakers we're going to hear from today. We're based here in Melbourne. We work across the full breadth of Victoria. And we talk endlessly about connecting strategy, culture and place. Just very briefly, we're not a practice that's kind of interested in form making, for example, or kind of material exploration for its own ends. For us, it's really about the extent to which the built environment fosters human relationships. And because we exist to enrich public life, our clients are all public institutions. And I'm just flagging that now because it becomes relevant talking about procurement and the barriers in procurement at a later stage. So we established the practice 10 years ago, and we've spent about half of that time trying to get plant-based public buildings built. And we first became interested in hemp for many of the key reasons that probably everyone in this room is interested in building with hemp. But over the past 5 years, as we've started to deliver some projects and as we've seen what gets traction with public clients, but also some of the benefits to communities, I guess we've started thinking about some of these other benefits and the narratives that are needed to build momentum. So here I'm referring to economic development too, if you're lucky enough to not be familiar with the ECDEV department in all local government. And I thought what might hopefully be moderately useful today is to talk through the projects that we've delivered over the past 5 years and what we learned from each of them, and I guess how that helped propel the next building to be completed, and also what's on the drawing board now, what we're looking at for the next 5 years. So this was the pioneering project, hemp project for our practice, and also we believe in Australia the first public hemp buildings. So 3 buildings on the Mighty Murray River at Powerhouse Place. And this time last year, this project won the highest award at the Victorian Architecture Awards. So thankfully it managed to get a bit of press. So the ABC, Guardian, a bit of mainstream media were interested in what hemp buildings looked like and why they might be built. But the fact that we actually got hemp across the line for these projects remains still a kind of delight to me because it was by no means guaranteed. And I think, harking back to that earlier slide, it was really around the political momentum and the political alignment of being able to say to a local government authority who had ESD policies and climate resilience policies with not many substantive metrics in them, that this was a way that they could actually enact meaningful work towards those aims. We had very much hoped for a kind of hyper-local supplier for this project. And so we were kind of promising the mayor and the CEO, a locally grown plant-based building. Ultimately, it was Victorian and I think some South Australian, some Tassie hemp that went into it. So, still in Australian government procurement guidelines, a locally grown product. But we faced some pretty serious barriers on this project, including, again, referring to procurement. So for those of you who are don't live in this world. Government money typically means open procurement. So when you have fully designed your building, then you go out to look for builders. In this case, it was two-stage, so it was an EOI, so completely open, any builder could submit, and then shortlisted to 3, I think. And all 3 tenderers, despite us clearly describing the impact of hemp and the importance of hemp and making sure that the evaluation criteria asked them to talk to their understanding of and methodology for hemp construction. All 3 offered massive cost savings to council if they eliminated all of the hemp during the build process, which put us in a pretty challenging situation. Also, again, because of that public procurement, some of the trades that the head contractor appointed, and in particular I'm thinking of the renderer, were just not particularly knowledgeable in terms of the products that they were working with. And given that that's the primary waterproofing barrier for a hemp building, it can be slightly challenging. Excuse me, it's the time of year when every Victorian school child gives their parents something disgusting. And I guess finally the process of actually getting a building permit was extremely stressful. So, 2 or 3 years of kind of political persuasion and design, and then the process of actually getting the paperwork was stressful and drawn out. We did have a performance solution prepared and then rejected by the building surveyor, and then a second performance solution prepared. If you're not familiar with performance solutions and code mark and stuff, happy to talk about it later.
I'm going to talk about it, don't worry.
Okay, great. So, these buildings were designed by us, but it was very much a group effort of many people here in this room, and Dick Clark, who I think, to actually secure the permits to allow this to be built. That's a shot of one of the buildings at Mildura. And while Mildura was under construction, we started designing, thank you, the Menian Community Hub, another, hemp-rich area in South Gippsland in Victoria. And the process of ensuring that hemp made it into this public building seemed much simpler for us this time around, that first follower mentality. So I think, that's not to be underestimated. We could point to another local government client who had already paved this way. We had photos of it under construction. We were getting moderately, promising press from the Mildura, rag. And so South Gippsland Shire Council had quite a degree of confidence that this was an acceptable decision. Again, we could point to alignment with their ESD policies, their sustainability policies. And for this project, we also, because of the fire ratings required, we did opt for a Code Mark certified product. Hopefully you're going to talk about Code Mark as well. For us, that was a real compromise because it was imported hemp. So, we felt like we were making some difficult trade-offs around carbon emissions associated with transport. But in this instance, for this project, I think it was hopefully the right thing to do. And our desperate hope is that where we have to use imported hemp, we demonstrate demand and then grow and build the local economy and supply chain. So that meant that we had a much smoother approvals process in terms of leveraging the deemed to satisfy provisions of the building code. We also, for Menian, used a mix of prefabricated block and in situ hemp. The real benefit was an incredibly tight site, and so from a materials handling point of view, that was really advantageous. Interestingly here, again, publicly procured, so we had no control over the builder. But their renderer was fantastic, and the difference between the identical product and the identical colour even on the Mildura project is really quite staggering. And on the far right you can see one of the things that we learnt from Mildura, I guess, was that exposing the hemp internally was probably going to be critically important for building this narrative. We had fully rendered it at Mildura, which means that it's not necessarily known by the community that they're inside a plant-based building. And going back to some of the reasons that we are really excited about hemp from that earlier slide, I guess, is this biophilic quality to it. So its irregularities, the fact that it's not a kind of homogeneous, prefabricated sheet material. So on the far right side, you can see the in situ hemp that is exposed in the meeting rooms throughout this building, and a deliberate attempt by us, you can kind of get a glimpse of the colours, to recast this as a contemporary material. Yes, it has a place in a kind of hippie, homegrown building, which we love as well, but trying to show that it actually can be contemporary and dynamic, and it can talk to lots of contemporary pedagogy and other approaches that public building clients are often wanting to look at. These are my lousy iPhone photos, so when it's properly photographed, it'll look much better. So I guess if I had to give us a scorecard, as a tiny practice that was motivated to start making buildings that were kind of less bad, with the end goal of ultimately, doing no harm to country, we were kind of making progress, but but kind of dabbling around the edges. I don't know, you may be familiar with the Australian Carbon Reduction Roadmap that University of Melbourne has just released, and that's talking to the housing sector in particular, but it's talking about a 98% reduction per square metre in embodied and operational emissions, like just mind-blowing figures. And so I guess our view is that we need a pretty substantial overhaul. It's not about tinkering and substituting kind of finishes, it's much more substantial. And so for us, I guess, what's on the drawing board right now, there's 2 projects that I've highlighted here, Rutherglen Hub and Baruna. We're doing a few things. So we're still doing new builds in hemp, obviously, but we're getting quite interested in the capacity to repair or do adaptive reuse and uplift the performance, so kind of deep retrofits through the use of hemp, whether that's prefabricated or other. We are doing work, I think everyone's trying to, grapple with the housing affordability crisis, so we do work in the social and affordable housing sectors, and, there has to be some synergies and opportunities there. I guess the other one is that we remain focused on hemp as a kind of primary construction system, but also we're desperately trying to incorporate hemp substitutes in any other parts of the building systems, whether that's joinery or other products. Our one fail on integrating hemp earlier this year was using a prefabricated panel system, and we just couldn't, I think it was a bit early in that coming to market, we just couldn't get sufficient documentation and warranties to persuade a local government client to actually sign off on it. And I guess the other thing is that we're now trying to really double down on life cycle analysis. Previously we had some pretty raw estimates that we could provide to our clients about the diverted carbon as a result of using hemp. But now we're trying to get smarter in terms of carbon accounting and also demonstrating alignment between, say, Green Star certification or Passive House and using hemp as a product. So this is a snapshot that's cropped in a way that's not particularly useful. This is the Rutherglen Silo Precinct, so reinvigorating an entire precinct. And the building, we're actually standing in the forecourt here of a building. So it's a really lousy kind of 1960s underperforming building, but the idea is that we strip it back to its structural frame, retaining the concrete and the steel, so the substantial embodied carbon, and then rebuild a hemp building around it.
When did you start that one?
Pardon?
When did you start that one?
When we get funding. It's fully documented, it's just waiting for some political money. So between all of us here in this room, there are probably many diverse kind of motivations and fascinations within the hemp ecosystem. But from my position as a specifier, and ultimately, hence, the bags under my eyes, the risk holder for those specification decisions, I guess the thing that we focus on endlessly is how we de-risk hemp, in order to mainstream it. And this is not new. Everyone in this room is preoccupied with these concerns. But I guess from my perspective, there are kind of 4 key quadrants. I think politically we've made quite a lot of progress, and I think we've also just been part of a big group called A New Normal, if anyone is interested in it, which is looking at what do we need to do to transform Melbourne from a consumer but to a producer as a city. So I think politically there's growing alignment and interest in these kind of narratives. I think from a procurement point of view, when we're talking about public buildings, it remains pretty complex. And it remains complex in terms of getting it across the line, but also the risks are substantial. When you have, often a kind of race to the bottom in public tendering, we could have a whole separate conference about that, but that is a given. So we work really hard to make sure that understanding of hemp and track record in hemp construction is evaluated, but obviously value for money for government clients, trumps everything every time. So I think, I know Passive House is a completely different entity with many different capacities and resources, but, their certified tradespeople schemes, I think something like that would be incredible, so that there's a bit of a kind of minimum benchmark for construction. Approvals, I won't read through this, but that remains critically important, and the draft Australian standards is a massive step forward there. And aftercare, I guess, is the only other one. Again, in public buildings, the recurrent operational maintenance costs for councils and state government clients are enormous. And so they want to know that there's actually a whole suite of products, not just the hemp and the render, but an anti-graffiti coating and, you know, all of these other things. And they want confidence that they're compatible. They don't just want me saying, oh, well, we think that they'll work well together. We've done some tests, you know. So if I had a magic wand, these are the things that we'd all be working on. And I'm getting the wind up. So thank you.
Nice one. There's mainly hemp here to celebrate the work.
Thank you.